I'm sitting here with Rav Cardozo, and we've been asking and reading different passages from great Jewish thinkers. I think one of the remarkable things about you, Rav Cardozo, is that you are a real theologian, and in the sense that, there are many rabbis who focus on the Talmud or who are experts in Halacha, Tanakh. Rav Ben Nun is an expert in Tanakh, but there aren't so many great Jewish theologians who focused on Jewish philosophy and Jewish mysticism and really invested their entire life in that field. Rabbi Heschel comes to mind, Rabbi Berkowitz, but that's something very unique about you, and I really want to commend you on that, because I feel like there's a big need for people to talk about the why, not just the what of Judaism.
Yeah, and that's very true. I don't know if I'm a real theologian, but I'm trying my best.
So I want to read a passage of the Rambam, who I would consider, if not the greatest, then definitely one of the greatest Jewish philosophers in all of Jewish history, the Rambam. And I just want to read it. I want to hear your thoughts on it. Do you agree, disagree? Okay, so this is a very famous quote of the Rambam. I think it's in the introduction to Shmona Prakim. Could be wrong, but I think it is. And it goes like this: you must accept the truth from whatever source it comes. What is your opinion on this?
Yes, this is a very famous quote of the Rambam, which I've used many times, and I strongly believe in that. And I think that if you look into the whole of Jewish tradition, you will see how much it has been influenced from sources from without. And I think that this is a religious thing and not something which is just a sociological condition in which the Jews found themselves. I believe, and perhaps this is a little naive, that God wants it to be like that we get influenced from outside so that we can bring it back into the Jewish tradition. By the way, Franz Rosenzweig also makes that point very clearly in his own specific way in the Star of Redemption. Yes, this is true. By the way, it is also true about Halacha. There are many halachot which came about purely because the non-Jewish world had set certain moral standards, and then the Jews, which is by the way a Talmudic statement, were obligated to live by it as well, since the Talmud has an observation or has a rule which says anything which is forbidden to the non-Jew can never be permitted to the Jew. Famous example is, why are we no longer allowed to marry more than one woman? And I looked into this, and Rabbeinu Gershom, who made that rule, at least for the Ashkenazi world, how did he get to that? The answer is very clear. The Catholic Church and the Roman Empire at the time had decided that you could not marry more than one woman because it was ethically problematic. At that moment, Rabbeinu Gershom said, if they say so, we can no longer permit it for ourselves. Why not? Because we cannot do something and allow ourselves something which the non-Jewish world has said it's not correct to do so. And I think that happens on many levels. And I think that this is some kind of a way in which God sends us messages of how to deal with halakha. For that reason, with any theology or whatever it is, we learn from them. And the beauty of the Rambam was to be prepared to write that in his time. He needed that because he was deeply influenced by Aristotle, right? And but the fact that he wrote this line, which I think many people in the yeshiva world have great trouble with, is one of the most fantastic lines he ever wrote, because it opens up a whole new world. And I think that if we move with that line and we continue to work with it halachically and non-halachically, we could create a much better and more beautiful Judaism with all its colors and all its different kinds of music, than holding on to one particular way of letting it progress, which may in many ways stagnate it on the very end, which I think is happening at this very, very moment.
I think what's powerful about what you said was it's not just an option. This is the way it's meant to be, that as a religious and Jewish person, we are always surrounded. We're a small nation. We've always been like this. The Torah says we're supposed to be small, that we're always going to be surrounded by these ideas around us. And what I like about the way you're talking about it, and obviously the Rambam says it, is this is a religious value. When you hear an idea in the world, not to feel like immediately I have to push it away, that let me look at it, ponder it. I don't have to accept it, but there could be some divine value. So what I want to do with you, and I want to ask you, is, you mentioned the Rambam was very attracted to Aristotle. He has a letter where he says he's just below the level of a prophet, which is a very big compliment. And Rav Kook was very influenced by Hegel, many people think, and definitely he says positive things about atheists, the secular Zionists. Rav Shagar was very influenced by postmodernism. I want to ask you, which non-Jewish thinkers do you think have most influenced you? I want to even give a few names, and what do you see in them that do you think will inspire, transform in a healthy way the Jewish tradition? Maybe name one or two non-Jewish thinkers, or even non-religious.
Well, first of all, I think that Spinoza has been incredibly important here. Most of what Spinoza writes, specifically in his Ethics, is very, very Jewish. He doesn't admit that, and I also feel that Harry Wolfson has written about this, was a big Spinoza scholar in Harvard, or I think it was Harvard, where he shows how much of Spinoza's ideas are rooted in earlier Jewish texts. Whether Spinoza did that deliberately by leaving that information out, I do not know. Spinoza was not always honest about everything. But definitely there are the Ethics of Spinoza is a marvelous work of a total genius of such a young age, and has been very inspiring to me. It is a very noble work. To me, it is a Musar Sefer in many ways. Not easy reading because he wrote it in a specific way which is not easy to understand. And there are hundreds of Pirushim on Spinoza, different interpretations what he had in mind, and I'm not sure that he always himself knew what he had in mind, but that's a whole story on itself.
So Spinoza's one.
Spinoza is one. An other person who I deeply admire, well, there are quite a few of them, but I have to think about the names. Somebody who wrote Das Heilige by the Holy, it was also translated in Hebrew, by a German philosopher who wrote about the religious experience. In other words, that there are a lot of things how we meet God, not by just prayer, but by having an encounter with Him, which we can afterwards in a difficult way, put into words. His name at the moment just escapes me. Sorry about that. Well, obviously you have...
you quote Wittgenstein in your writings.
Yes, that's a very important point. Wittgenstein, who by the way was of Jewish background, did not know anything about it, was extremely honest. In the middle of his life, he completely turned around his philosophy and started all over again. He was closely related to Bertrand Russell. Wittgenstein, in according to some philosophers, made an end to philosophy. That he was the last philosopher by showing that language is so subjective of what we mean by a word that it is nearly impossible to say anything. I think one of his last lines in one of his books, his famous books, is about what you can say clearly you should say, and for anything else you should be silent.
It sounds like Kohelet.
It looks like Kohelet, yes. Which means to say that about most of the things we have to be silent. It took him a few thousand words to make that point, but I think there's a lot of truth in that. Wittgenstein was also, he was not religious, but he definitely left the door open to religion and never denied the importance of it. Those people who today consider themselves to be atheists, I've read many of them, I find in general very cheap and not very profound. Also, they became very popular, like what is his name? Christopher Hitchens, and some others. I read their stuff. I found it very superficial. And you
admire more Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre.
Yes. Sartre was is also not without its problems, but he at least tried to be honest about it. I heard that Sartre, in the end of his life, he had a Jewish student by the name of, I forgot his first name, it's called Levi, who became a Baal Teshuvah, and after he was his secretary. And he became a professor himself, and then he came to live here in Jerusalem, 5 minutes away from me. He's no longer alive. And when he spoke with Sartre on the end of his life, Sartre suddenly realized that perhaps the truth is different than what he actually had been written. But he has written very great things.
I can hear in the tone of your voice this almost childhood excitement, youthful excitement when you mention non-Jewish and non-religious philosophers and thinkers. And I think this comes across in your writings a lot, that for you putting the Jewish tradition in dialogue with non-Jewish sources is religious value for you. Just like Rambam writes,
Right.
Accept the truth from whoever you hear it, that for you there's no boundaries for God. That if God is speaking to you, then whoever says it, if it's Jewish, non-Jewish, religious, non-religious, I have to take it seriously and I have to ponder it. I don't have to accept it, but I have to think about it.
I have once said, and perhaps there's a little bit too much to say, but all philosophy and perhaps all literature is really a pirush on the Torah, a kind of explanation of the Torah, because there are always things there which are very truthful, which afterwards we can use to understand the Torah even better. One of the big problems today in the religious world, not only in the ultra-Orthodox world, but also in the Dati Leumi world, the modern Orthodox world, is that this is not being accepted. What we are doing is we see the books which at the moment are being published, most of them within these two worlds, are just rewritings of what other people have already said. But that means to say that it looks like the word of God has been exhausted. And that is a most terrible mistake. We have constantly to look into that Torah in a new way. That's, by the way, the reason why I wrote my new books on the Chumash, trying to show again that there are also options, especially after the Holocaust, which has put us into a very difficult situation from a theological point of view, and still to say even the Torah is important to the atheist and the denier. Why? Because the amount of wisdom there to be found and read between the lines is still of ultimate importance.
Another thing that interests me when I read your writings is it never feels like you're quoting non-Jewish sources to sound impressive, because that is often, a way to impress people, to just quote, a lot of philosophers. There's a real sense that you're quoting them because they've inspired you and they've informed your values. And again, it goes back to that Rambam statement that if you take truth and God seriously, then it doesn't matter who says it. You have to read it.
True. But I must say that, I can't say often, but it happens to me, that people come to me and say to me, why are you quoting this non-Jewish source to show us that you know about it? And that is mainly because when people read it, and I know the kind of people reading it, just don't understand what I'm trying to do over there. I really believe that there is something in Nietzsche which we should learn, and Spinoza, or whoever it is, because it adds to our religiosity, and that's the reason why I'm quoting them. And I want to show that, therefore, we can learn from anybody. And that's exactly what the Rambam was trying to say.